All right, this is just a little update on MUVR. I believe it was December of last year, possibly early January of this year, that the program finally got an update after almost years of no updates. And basically, all the update did was allow for user-generated content to be added. Up until this point, everything in this program was made by one person, which is very impressive, but obviously probably a lot of work, and he probably got tired of it. But now anyone can make models, whether it's for new consoles, new shelves, new props like the controllers, or cartridges for specific consoles. So the floodgates have basically opened up really just in the last few months. We've got lots of new content that I wanted to show, starting with just little things like props. So for example, this EGM magazine here. You know, obviously people are making artwork and they're just going to have, you know, all kinds of magazines, Nintendo Power and EGM, if you want to have those kind of spread around. People make little shelves and stuff for, you know, maybe like a little shelf that just holds Game Boy games. You're starting to see box art, so you could have Super Nintendo boxes, or I think you can have like DVD cases or VHS boxes. Someone actually made a little boom box that you can have little cassette tapes, kind of similar to how the VCR works. Or you could have like an album or something on a cassette tape and, you know, put it in and play it. So a working radio for music, because that one that this program came with, as far as I know, has never worked. It's just for show. But yeah, you can have music now on little cassettes, which is cool. Like I've always said, I'm trying to keep this room looking like it's the mid-90s. The newest thing in here is still the N64. But obviously there's some newer systems that have come out. So I'll show you some of them, but I guess to start with, we'll go over here to the Sega Genesis. If you may recall, previously I could play Sega Genesis, but the system itself was just a generic looking box. It didn't have the Sega Genesis modeled. And here we have a very, very nicely modeled Sega Genesis. This looks very, very good. High definition graphics, so it's one of the early Model 1s. There's also a Mega Drive and a Model 2 that I noticed when I was downloading this one. But yeah, pop that in. Again, the cartridges themselves, I was not able to find a model for. It's not to say someone hasn't made one, it's just I couldn't find it. So I'm still using the generic models for sort of the generic cartridge. But we've got the Sega Genesis, and that looks awesome. As you can see, we've got the Game Gear here. And the Game Gear is pretty well modeled. It's not quite perfect like the Sega Genesis. It's a little darker, but it looks really cool. We've got reflections on the screen, on that glossy screen. Oh, and yeah, by the way, this does work, but again, I can't find a model for the cartridge, so we're still using the generic cartridge for a Game Gear, which is way too big. I was able to download the cover art for Sonic the Hedgehog for the Game Gear version, and I cut the edges round like they would be on a Game Gear cartridge. So once someone models, or again, someone may have already, I just haven't found it. But once I find a model for the Game Gear cartridge, that artwork should look right on there. And as much as it doesn't look like this should work, it does. The handhelds are playable. I will show that a little bit later. And again, that looks really cool, especially when you can still kind of see the reflection on the screen of some of the stuff behind you. Very, very cool. And I mean, you can just sit that down. Oops, I just hit my monitor. Poor monitor. You You can see down there we've got a Sega Saturn. It's not perfect, but it looks okay. It's a little weird looking here, the way the reflections of this part of the plastic comes out. And I don't know, something about that doesn't look 100% right. Like the bottom and the back and like everything's, it's very well modeled, it's just not perfect. So yeah, we've got a Sega Saturn if we want to play Saturn games. We've got a Famicom here. It looks a little bit weird. The color is not right at all. I think they released a special edition of the Famicom Mini that was this color, but I don't know. That's definitely not the right color for a Famicom, but I still thought it looked cool. We've got models for controllers. Now these don't do anything. They're called props. So you can just have them kind of sitting around and mostly just for looks. But it does look pretty cool. And yeah, I guess last but not least, oh, not quite. I guess we've got the Kirby there. And again, that's just a prop. So yeah. Last but not least, the Game Boy. Well, I'll show you quickly. They do have Game Boy Advance, and I've seen some different color variants of it. Again, there's multiple people working on stuff, so you may find someone made a Game Boy Advance model, you may find someone else made a better one. So these may not be the best, or there may be different color variants out there. The Game Boy Color, for example, looks a little strange to me. I think it looks a little bit too tall. The aspect ratio and the scaling on that, I don't think is 100% proper. The NES controller, again, just another prop. And yeah, it looks cool. A little too dark, I think. I'm trying to think of the NES controller. Normally the color of the top of the system, wouldn't it? Or is it sort of in between the bottom and the... I'm not sure. That just doesn't look 100% right to me. You tell me what's wrong with that controller. It's a little bit too dark. The plastic, the gray plastic is a little bit too dark, isn't it? Anyways, the Game Boy. Pretty good model here. And we've got the cartridges modeled as well. So I was able to download the model for the cartridge, and then I made my own cover art for these. I'm sure someone else has made these. I probably could have just downloaded it, but I thought it was probably almost quicker for me just to make those myself. Again, they're just PNG files, and just kind of make sure the aspect ratio is right and the edges are slightly rounded, and I should be good to go. But yeah, this works. It looks really cool. And again, if you let it sit long enough, it will go through its attract mode. By the way, I don't have the BIOS files installed for Game Boy. I believe if I did, like in RetroArch, you'd get the little boot, like, you know, the Nintendo come down, ba-ding, the little boot sequence. So that's true with a lot of emulators. You know, certain systems like the Saturn and the PlayStation, you need to have the BIOS files installed in RetroArch for them to even work at all. But other systems like the Game Boy or the Game Boy Advance, for example, you don't need the BIOS files installed. You can play the systems. But if you want the little boot up splash screen, like when you turn on a Game Boy Advance, you know, and it does its little ba-ding-ding thing or whatever the heck it does. I'm trying to think Game Boy Color versus Game Boy Advance. Again, if you have the BIOS files installed, you'll get that. So when I turn this on, you know, it just goes right into the game. But you know, you can have the BIOS files installed. Now, these are playable, of course. Everything in here is playable, so it'd be kind of silly if these weren't playable. And honestly, at first, I kind of wondered if they were going to be playable or not, because you can, check this out, you can plug this into a TV if you want to play it on TV. And, you know, before these existed, these Game Boy models in the program, that was how you had to play Game Boy games. You had to play Game Boy games or Game Gear games, you know, on a TV, with the kind of generic looking, kind of Master System looking console thing. So that kind of sucked. But now, we can, if I can get this figured out, yep. We can play this. I love the fact they went for the retro, you know, pea soup green, and of course that just makes sense on a DMG. They wanted to make this look like it's a DMG, and whoops. B and A are a little backwards here on my VR controller, so it's a little awkward sometimes playing Game Boy. Yeah, they nailed the retro look here. I think there's even a little bit of motion blur added to the screen for effect. So yeah, that's cool. And there you go. And of course, if we stop playing that and turn off the system, you can turn it on and just kind of have it go through its attracts mode. But how freaking cool is that, man? And it's only been a couple of months, and I haven't got everything, obviously. There's so many people making so many new models and props and stuff. You know, geez, I'm only showing you a small fraction of it. I'm going to have a link in the description of my video linking to this dude's video that I saw that sort of shows you how to do all this. And in his video, in his description of his video, he's got a link to his Google Drive. And he's got all these files. So any of these models that you want, you can download. And it's really cool that he's done that, because right now this is on like an MUVR Discord. But it's invite only, and like right now you can't get in. So this guy's taken all the files, at least the ones that he thinks are the best, or the ones that he's using, and he's got them on his Google Drive. So if it wasn't for him, I don't even know if I would have got this working. So I'll have the link in the description. Check out his video, give it a thumbs up, and then go into the description, and his Google Drive will let you download all these if you want to check them out for yourself. But this is just so cool. And, you know, these are only going to get better. Some of these models aren't perfect. But again, with multiple people working on them, they're only going to get better from here on out. And in a few months, already a lot of awesome stuff has come out. But anyways, guys, check it out. And I guess that's it. See you later.